building a trailer for that. I bought a caravan axle at a silly giveaway price, brand new one, 4x2-inch box section steel. I had sketched it, designed the trailer, and spent several days of our Christmas shutdown with a welder and an angle grinder, because I had the run of the factory. So that was all right, and that was far more interesting and productive. That was taken, a friend of mine's 34 foot something or other, and we were sailing off Salcombe, and I got him to wind me up the mast, and that's my foot there on the spreaders, one of the spreaders, looking down on the crew. I just happened to like the picture. Now, coming on to satellite navigation briefly, that is how it was in this first system, that the satellites were in half a dozen satellites in polar orbits, and they took, I think I remember, about an hour and a half to go round. They weren't very high up, but that is more interesting, because those of you who can use a sextant and do that sort of navigation, you only need one satellite to get a position fix. Now that doesn't seem sensible, does it? But it's a bit like using a sextant and taking a running fix. Say a morning sun site, a noon site, or an ex-meridian, an afternoon site. Moving your position by dead reckoning between the fixes, you could get a series of position lines which would then enable you to determine your position at the what would have been the equivalent of an afternoon fix. So there is just a drawing to show how it worked. And you listened, your radio listened to all the orbital data. It measured the, getting technical, Doppler shifted radio frequency of the received signal. And by comparing what it should have listened to for a satellite in a particular orbit, and comparing that with the Doppler shifted frequencies it actually received, and comparing the two, it could say, not the same, you can't be there in that long. So it did what these computer people apparently call an iterative program. It moved your DR position a bit, redid the sums, until it got the best match it could between what it should have received on its radio with what it actually received, and said, bingo, that's where you are. It was historical because a satellite pass was about 15 minutes. So you had to be something like 20 minutes out of date. But that's the principle on which it worked. There's one of them. And that again is I think we forget that. But that is, what you see, it's on 400 megahertz, and you get these series of different received frequencies. Then we move to GPS. They're not in polar orbits. You don't talk to the satellites. You pick them up on your receiver. These days it'll be in your pocket or in your watch or something. Such is the progress in technology. And this was purely an indication of different geometries and how, like any navigation, depending on what you're measuring, whether it's a horizontal bearing, whether it is a horizontal angle with a sextant, or what it is, depending on the shape of the various intercepts, determines how good and how accurate your result's going to be. And that's it, as far as that's concerned. Went to the Science Museum a few years ago. The first thing I saw was a triple expansion steam engine. Came up from a boat called the Glenstrath Allen. She was built, looked like a trawler. She was built by, built as a private powerboat. And when the owner died, the widow wanted it taken out into the Atlantic and sunk. And it seemed a shame. It was then used by the King Edward VII Training College in East London for training people and continued going to sea. And then, I've forgotten what else happened to it, but I went to sea with it several times. And these triple expansion engines, if you haven't been to see one, you have somebody with an oil can sort of leaning in every time the crankshaft went round. They're quite fun in a different way. It's a bit like traction engines. I've been to sea with several steam-driven ships. There was one based in Hull that was an agate-fish research boat, and the skipper was a chap called Captain Binningham. He had a gut out here. Would you like a gin and orange? You said, well, that would be it, before you worried about driving. Well, that would be nice. It was about that much gin and just a dash of orange. I mean, it was all right if you weren't driving. But that's the last slide. The only other things to mention, really, was when I went to work for Navstar in Daventry, because they made their name, Walker's made their name 100 years ago. The Birmingham company, 1838, when it started building these old mechanical logs. And then Navstar, as it was known, made a name for themselves with electronic position fixing, starting with a Decca navigator, which I could talk to you about, but I won't this time of night. It's time I shut up. And I used to write the instructions, do the sea trials, prove the navigation software that they'd done it right. Once they hadn't, they put the engineers, the software guys, put the magnetic variation in twice instead of once. So that was all wrong. I had to get that put right. And I used to have quite a big input into what I call the human interface, what buttons did what, to make it easy to use. I've brought one or two bits. Other than that, I think I took the cover photograph for that. That was one of the last books on GPS I wrote. The inside won't interest you in the slightest, but it gives you an idea of what they looked like. And I'm going back now to about 1990. And it was a very good set. Princess Anne had one on her yacht in Scotland, but I wrote the book and had a very good positive feedback from an American yachting magazine editor saying how good it was, because a lot of people write these sort of things. They either miss vital bits out like they do for television, or they don't write them in a logical order. I mean, the first thing you want to do is install it. Even if you don't do it, you only install a thing once, so you put it at the back. And in the front you put how to program it. And one of the things I haven't mentioned is all the problems we and the industry had in changing from dead reckoning navigation to satellite navigation. Or the Decca system, or LORAN, which is an acronym of long range navigation. And it's because you're used to bearings, distances travelled, all sorts of bearings and things. Unless you do celestial navigation, in which case you get more into the likeness of that sort of thing. But the average yachtsman didn't understand latitude and longitude. Perhaps that's an unkind thing to say, but it was basically true, unless you used the sextant. You worked on bearings and distances travelled and that sort of thing, and tide. So when we launched, as we did, we spent a day and a half just before the London Boat Show, January 1980, over a few gin and tonics, because we all got slightly inebriated. The directors at Walker's were quite a pissy lot. And what are we going to call this thing? We marketed it because we were world famous. The people who designed it in Daventry weren't known, so we launched it. Spent a day and a half at the London Boat Show doing radio and television interviews. And I came up with the word sat-nav, and they thought that was brilliant. Registered it at the patent office, and of course it's a daily word, has been for years now. But in those days, it wasn't. And the other thing is that because they then had to work in latitude and longitude, waypoints, aircraft industry, I think for many years, but not in the marine world, certainly not coastal sailing or cross-channel in our case, that sort of thing. Everything, as I say, was ranges and bearings and things, dead reckoning. So I used to go onto yachts, they say, your equipment's no good at all. Look at it, it says the NAB tower is southwest of the handle. What have you got for the latitude and longitude of the NAB tower? And they'd call out what they... I said, that's not right, is it? They just didn't understand latitude and longitude. And when you put the right figures in, you gave the right answer. But it happened so many times. I did every London boat show from 1962 through till about 1993, end to end. And I mean, after the launch at the 1980 boat show, there was a huge gang up. I mean, what an emotive thing. I'd been out with Tomorrow's World, that was a BBC programme, team, off Poole from the Royal Motor Yacht Club, and in a powerboat, and my finger got on television because they couldn't work the equipment. And I helped them write the script the night before. Then they did all this, all these day and a half we did of being interviewed all about it, and then a terribly posh voice, lady, and this crowd in front of the stand said, tell me, she said, if I buy one of these, do I need any knowledge of navigation to go to sea? I bit my tongue. I wasn't rude, you can't be rude to protect your potential customers. And another man with a piece of paper in his pocket had a couple of figures. He said, can you tell me if that's the entrance to Scarborough? Black and long. And he was a fisherman. And he wanted a sat-nav, or he bought a sat-nav, and he used to go out there, and he got to get himself back into the harbour. He hadn't got any charts or anything, he just wanted to know if he'd got written down the right black and long. And I could go on and on about that sort of thing. I was there when the bomb went off on a Saturday afternoon at Earl's Court. That was quite impressive. In the 70s, Earl's Court was packed. If there wasn't a good football match on, it was packed. People sat on your stand with a thermos of coffee and ate their sandwiches and that sort of thing. You couldn't move. And there were coded messages over the PA system. And this one was a genuine one. Somebody had planted a bomb and they emptied the place. I finished my gin and tonic because that's #1 priority. And we were upstairs, so it was likely to be all right. We didn't know where the bomb was. But it actually was down the loo in the stern of a powerboat. It gives a new meaning to Thunderbox, doesn't it? And it did. They emptied the place. We got out the back. Boom! And that was it for the day. The police wouldn't let anybody back in case there was another one. But it was interesting. And I did a live broadcast from Pebble Mill. That was interesting. After that January boat show, and this was the first system, they said, you're obviously competent to talk. Can we interview you? So I said, well, yes, I suppose so, not knowing what they're going to ask you. So I went down to Pebble Mill and with a sat-nav, and I think I had a sextant, one of the ancient towing logs, that sort of thing. And, you know, cameras those days, they were quite big, red light on top, and this thing was like this. Now, I have with me today in the studio, blah, 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 Tony John. Tell us, Tony, how does it work? In English. And it went off all right. I didn't err or once, apparently. So that was quite good, because you don't know what they're going to say. And the last one I did was over here in the flat in Wheaton. And the BBC rang up one evening and said, this was in the year 2000, when everyone was getting neurotic about computers dealing with the millennium. And they said, can we interview you tomorrow morning, 7:10? And I said, yes, all right. So I set an alarm for 5 to 7. Alarm goes off, downstairs, 2 mugs of tea, one for Julia, one for me. Back up to bed, phone in one hand, mug of tea in the other. 7:10, phone ring, and I did a live broadcast from there, just to do with the rollover and how it might have affected GPS and that sort of thing. So it was interesting. I also wrote for Practical Boat Owner for about 10 years. They asked me to, I wrote an article on digital interfacing. It's taken for granted today, most complex stuff, but it wasn't about 1990, 91. It was much more better. I thought somebody ought to write an article in plain English, not all this jargon and computer speak. And I did it. I did one for the last 4 pages of PBO. They were so pleased with it. They then invited me to be their technical expert. Now, nobody is an expert. It's all relative, isn't it? But I probably compared with the average member of the public, I had a lot of years of experience on yacht electrics and electronics, designing anemometers, using wind tunnels for tests, all that sort of stuff. So I did, and I did it for about 10 years. And that was quite interesting. And I used to get free copies, so that was even more interesting.
So, Bernie, can I say, you talk about plain English, but I had a Navstar, Janice and I had a Navstar on our first boat, and the guide for using that Navstar is the best guide I've ever seen for using a bit of equipment.
Was that a piece of green card?
It was, because you wrote it, I believe, and it was brilliant. Yes, Navstar Decker Navigator.
That's right.
Yeah. It was very clear, very plain.
I'll tell you something about those. You could make the display bright or dim for nighttime use. And when the engineers were discussing it, I said, is it bright or dim for the user, or is it bright or dim for the display? Because we had 2 levels of operation. One told you where you were, told you how to get to a waypoint, and speed over the ground. And that was it.
Well, the guard must have been for a dim user, Tony.
Oh, but you have to. But if you went to the advanced level, you could set routes and all sorts of things. So you know, it was all a lot of fun.
Tony, going back to the old technology, I was fascinated by the mechanical depth sound you showed us. I'd never heard of such a thing.
Nor had the people in New Zealand.
There seemed to be something a bit illogical about it, because the rotor was allowed to spin all the way down to the bottom.
Which you let the line go slack.
Yeah,
So
and
it
then
went
the
whizzing
ice
down.
comes in and it stops it spinning when you pull it up again.
Yes.
But it would have been much simpler just to half the distance travelled to get you there.
You'd have had to reverse the direction the spinner turned, wouldn't you?
But you ended up with 0, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, you got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. You've explained in words less little. Thank you.
Anyway, there we go. I used to enjoy writing for the magazine because some of the questions were so silly. They really were. Anyway, I've talked enough. About an hour and 20 minutes, and if I kept you too long.
Can I ask you to do the vote of thanks for Tony?
Tony, gosh. I'm lost for words.
That makes 2 of us.
Tony, that's an amazing insight into your career. And we are so privileged to have you as a member of NOSCA and also particularly a member of the committee. You were talking about sort of, could you helm, or since you're sort of an expert on guided missiles, some would say, can you helm? I'm not quite sure about that. But then of course you go for an auto start for starting things off. This also obviously helps you in assisting us with our presentations, where you're seriously involved in auto starting us. But the most fascinating thing, of course, is the technological advances from yesteryear to today. And in fact, the walk along that you talk about, Wendy has one on from
I
her
think you
first
told
boat.
me, yes.
And we have it on the boat. Yes. And then you were talking about sort of having your Christmas involved in the boat rather than the family. Wendy, what's your T-shirts? Man wanted, show me a photograph of the boat.
Oh yes, hang on a minute. Man wanted.
Man wanted with boat, that's right. Man wanted with boat.
Man wanted with boat. Send photo of boat.
So true. Yes.
So, yeah, so thank you very much, Tony, for
I brought
sharing this.
a couple of, one book here, which was one of the last ones I wrote. I think I did the cover photograph as well on GPS. And I only brought this book, I bought it in 1952. It's Imre's navigation tables, full of 5-figure logarithms and haversides and things like that, so that I could teach myself astronav, which I did, and proved it on a cargo ship, just to see I could do it. And another book there I got a lot of thanks for, which was published by, in conjunction with Practical Boat Owner. But it's a beautifully illustrated book for which I have no claims to at all, but I got a big thank you on that. But that was interesting. The last time I used those tables was for Navstar, funnily enough, using 5-figure tables for calculating great circle ranges and bearings to see that the software guys had done the sums correctly for using great circles on long-distance sailing. And I'll tell you very briefly what was interesting, and that is, they got it right. I calculated them, and I always agreed on the range, on the bearing, from here to New Zealand somewhere, say. For example, take the extreme case. We always agreed within better than 1 degree on the initial heading. Never agreed on the range. And the reason I worked out was because these tables were written for use with the sextant before all the electronics, and they assumed the Earth was a sphere. Now, as a result of WGS 84, World Geodetic System 1984, on which the satellites, the GPS satellites operate, you take the equatorial diameter, the flattening at the poles, and a 3D position of the centre of the Earth. If you take those into account, we differed from here to New Zealand about 6 miles. But of course, as you got nearer, the error disappeared, didn't it? Job done.
So the time we got that.
Anyway, there we go.
Tony, once again, thank you very much. Can I say, members, that the best way to show your appreciation is a couple of short articles for the newsletter to Tony.
Thank you.
I just am reminded of 2 funny things when I saw your picture of the switching gear that you begged from GC, because I worked for GC at about that time. I think it might have been the Australia exchanges. It is interesting in the technology, because my husband was a research engineer with GC at the time, and of course worked on the System X thing, which was big stuff in the 80s. I mean, goodness knows where we are now. You know, we've got these little phones, you press a few buttons and you can phone anywhere in the world, so it's rapid, the technology. But the other thing that I find highly amusing and deeply nostalgic was the sideburns.
It's getting like that at the moment.
All these engineers walked about strutting these Elvis sideburns, thought they were the bee's knees at the time, and the flared trousers.
We were.
Obviously, I could go into a lot of detail on these things, but I won't.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jerry.
My
I just
pleasure.
think it's fantastic to look back over all those things in our lifetime, these things.
Yes,
Yeah.
where will it all end?
Well, we don't want to know. But no, thank you, that was great fun. Very much indeed.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any questions? Anything else outstanding? Right, can I remind you of the laying up supper, please? Are you okay?
Sorry,
It's all right, okay, thank you. And any articles, as Bob said,
Yeah.
and the AGM coming up, and some thoughts about things for the, you know, if any of you'd like to volunteer and do something on the committee. And even if you can't be on the committee, and I know I've said this every year for I don't know how many years I've been around here, please, are you willing to help out on things, you know, an odd hour here, a couple of phone calls, anything that would help out the committee would be greatly appreciated. So thank you very much, and I hope you have a good evening.
Thank you, Adrian.